Let's see. Is it there? See it. I'll say it. I'm gonna retweet it to all my followers.
Hey, I'm Michael Dorinda,
And I am Jake Bennett.
and welcome to episode 74 of the North Meet South Web podcast.
Dude, I gotta tell you, I'm really tired. I'm
Really tired.
really freaking tired. I am. Yes, it
This
has been.
this this shift in time zones is not helpful.
You know what? I think I told you this. That we did our last time zone change, like our last one.
Yeah,
So we are now forever and ever on to the I don't even know what it is. I just know that we're not changing time again.
yeah.
So
So you now
we're
are on
good. No more
summertime,
daylight
and so
savings
you're
time.
just gonna
No
stay.
DST.
But you're on summertime now. Like
Yeah,
you went forward, and now you're staying forward.
exactly. That's
Yeah,
right.
yeah,
Yeah.
yep.
I
Cool.
mean, as far as I know, the House voted on it, but the Senate hasn't voted on it yet, or vice versa, or something. And just for our state, of course. But yeah, we'll see what happens. So I'm
Nice.
hopeful though, because I hate the day. I hate the change in time stuff. It's annoying.
Yeah, I would
Oh
be happy
wow,
if it was
this.
summertime all the time.
You know what? Who is this guy? I feel like I've seen his name before. Let me give a quick shout out.
Rod Elias
Rod
hanging out with
Elias. Yeah,
us.
he's
Yeah.
up at 1:20 a.m. listening. So Rod, thanks for hanging out with us, man. Appreciate it. Well, you know what? You have been working your full head off on Then Ping Me
Yeah.
these last, I don't know, week and a half, 2 weeks, whatever. You've had a bit of a holiday, as they say, in the Australian land. You know what else I heard the other day that I was like, oh, that's an Aussie thing is, and it's not Aussie, I think it's British, but it translates down to you guys is done and dusted. We
Done
don't
and
use that
dusted.
phrase.
You
We
don't
don't
say
use
done
that
and
phrase
dusted?
here. We do not say done and dusted.
I wish I was done and dusted.
Do you know what it means? Like where? No, that's not correct. Do you know the etymology?
I
I
don't
think is
know
the
the
correct.
etymology. These are just the kinds of things that you hear and you say because you say them
Done and
after you hear
dusted.
them. Yeah.
Yeah. So what does it mean to you? What does done and dusted mean to you?
Well, it means we're finished and we're ready to move on.
Yeah. So done and dusted was like when you would sign a document, the ink would be wet yet for a while, right? When you're using like those quill pens,
Mm-hmm.
or whatever, so they would dust it. So that's like seals the thing. So it's like done, it's written and it's dusted, done and dusted, completely finished.
Nice.
Yeah. Oh, that was interesting because I heard you say it like a couple weeks ago, and I was like, "What does that mean?" I'm sure that's a phrase that they use, and then I heard somebody else say it, and then I saw it on a TV the other day, like a TV screen. It said "done and dusted." I was like, "Okay, I've got to look this up." So anyway,
Now,
that's it.
now you're up to
That's
date.
what it is.
Now you're up to date.
So I would like to spend a little bit of time talking about Then Ping Me, but before we do, any interesting, weird stuff going on that you've been interacting with at work or anything like that?
Well, no, I've
Yeah, you've
been
been off work. Never
I've
mind.
been off.
So your
Well,
work has
actually,
been Then Ping Me.
that's not entirely true. I am off, but I got a phone call because I work from an internet provider. So I got a phone call from my boss at like 4:30 on Friday afternoon, and the National Broadband Network, which is the wholesale provider for the majority of internet across Australia, which is a government-owned entity at the moment, has come out with a whole heap of relief packages and things like that for people that have been laid off or they're on
Sure.
support programs and things like that to help keep them connected.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
we had to scramble to get a press release out to add a special offer. So I think I finished. I had to go and pick Eli up from childcare, so I didn't really start until about 7. But yeah, I finished up about 10 o'clock on Friday night, getting all of this together, and it's been really good for the people that need it. We've had a whole heap of extra customers come on board and take up the offer, which is really good considering that we, launched it, announced it at 10 o'clock on a Friday night, and it's a weekend. Weekends are usually pretty quiet in terms of acquisition, but things have been going really well over the weekend in terms of picking up and helping these people out. So, yeah, it was it was interesting to get called into work on a Friday, but these are strange times, so we do what we
They
can
are.
to help out
They really
people
are.
as much as we can.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of crazy stuff going on. Unprecedented. I'm tired. I mean,
Unprecedented.
we had some friends we were just talking to last night. They're like, we're so tired of hearing all these like phrases now. It's unprecedented. This is, you know, stay apart, stay safe. I don't know, like just all the people, all the things that people say.
Yeah, all the
Oh,
cliches.
yeah, all those cliches. It looks like
Uh-huh.
YouTube wasn't working. So sorry if you were trying to watch this on YouTube. Okay, so a couple things. So one of the things I'm working on right now at work is this card gateway. So it's a payment collection utility. I don't know, it's like a payment instrument where you can go in and put your payment information, right? So we're going to handle all the
Mm-hmm.
PCI compliance portion of it and all that. So um, it's been really interesting because I get to basically make the form whatever I want it to be. So I've been digging in through all of this like best practice UI stuff as far as like what is the best way to present this and to make sure that the users are getting the best experience on mobile and to make sure that we have the lowest amount of abandon rates, et cetera, et cetera. There's been this website that I've found extremely useful, and I'm going to try and find it real quick. It's like Nielsen and something. Nielsen. That's gonna never mind. I'm not gonna find it. I'll link it up in the show notes afterwards. But they have like all these best practices for checkout forms, which is really helpful. Smashing Magazine had another one. But one of the challenges that we had is trying to fit everything onto this page. And we almost went the route of using floating labels. Have you ever used floating labels before? Do you know what those are?
I've never used them, but I'm familiar with them.
Yeah, so there's like you have a placeholder, and then when they focus into the input, that placeholder basically moves up to be a label on that input, and then
Yeah.
So it's really interesting. So we had to make some trade-offs this week around that. But I found a lot of really interesting reading on that, and so
Mm-hmm.
I might actually make a little blog post up about that or something, because there's some really great resources out there, and a lot of it is specifically focused around mobile users and how you can make sure that their experience is the best. Because I feel like more and more, that's how people are consuming these things, right? Is through
Yeah.
a mobile context. Even payments, especially almost payments. Like a lot of our visitors are mobile users, and so really optimizing that experience to make sure that it's great. Some of the things that we have though on our phones really do help to aid this experience, but there's like some gotchas you got to be really careful about. So one of the things we wanted to do is we wanted to use an address field like Algolia Places.
Mm-hmm.
So Algolia Places you start typing in your address and it auto gives you, hey, this is the city state zip, and you say excellent. You press enter, and away you go. But what we were doing to kind of make our form look less visually complex, because when users arrive on your page, they sort of do a quick mental tally, like how much
Mm-hmm.
work is this going to take to get done, right? So first impression is actually really important. Like how many fields are there? How difficult is it? Is it really dense? Is it got a little bit of space to it? Whatever. So we hid some of the fields that weren't necessary. So we had name and then your address, and we hid city, state, and zip and address too. And so they would fill in address one, and then as they would get the address back from Algolia Places, they would press enter, and it would fill in the city state zip for them, right? But what we realized is that would break any of the autofill capability that you would have on your mobile phone,
Mm-hmm.
right? So like these are the sorts of things we keep running into, like little things, little gotchas like that. They also say that you should never, ever, ever, ever use a drop down if you can avoid it on a mobile phone.
Mm-hmm.
So like a lot of times you'd use that for like a state or something, right?
Yeah.
So we have 50 states, you'd click it and you have, that way you can make sure they never mess it up. But like they said like, don't do that. Just give them a 2-character input box and just let them type it in, right? It's going to be
Yeah.
way easier than having to have them select it. Um, Same thing with like month and day and year, like or actually it's month and year, right? Don't do a drop down. Don't separate them. Just be as intelligent as you can. Give them a number input field and have them just type it in. So
Yeah,
it's
those
been,
drop downs, the drop downs for
yeah,
expiry are interesting because you don't know whether that, like for example, the month, are they 1 through 12? Are they 1 through 12? Are they January through February? And if you're just tabbing through a form and you start typing, oh, crap, it's not that. You've got to open it up, you've got to look, you've got to find, you've got to click. It's easier. And then to handle the validation on your end once that's done, as
totally,
opposed to trying to have the drop downs.
100%.
Yeah.
Yeah, so just being like intelligent about it, and like also like trying to, it's like the whole front end versus back end validation, and how intelligent do you want to be on the front end? Like you can even do things like validate bank account routing numbers and stuff like that on the front end before you ever
Mm-hmm.
touch the back end. So those sorts of things are really handy and convenient. So we actually just had like a record month last month of transactions through our payment gateway that we built a year ago. I don't think I'm able to disclose the number, but it was an extremely significant amount. It's gone like it's hockey sticked. Like
Yeah.
first month we had like 4 payments, and then the next month we had 9, and then it was like 78, like 300. Like it just keeps going up, and like yeah, the average payment amount is like significant. It's like in hundreds of in the
Yeah.
hundreds of dollars. So like it's doing a really good job. So it's like,
It's
hey,
good.
let's pour gasoline on this fire
Yeah.
and like make this form even better, because right now it's doing a crazy redirect.
Mm-hmm.
It's like redirecting to this like old payment.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, it's horrible, dude. It's
Isn't it
so
great?
bad.
I've got a client like
Oh,
that.
it's
They've got
unbelievable.
a payment thing, and you go through this designed. We built them a form. Well, I built them a form, and it's this whole designed application. And then when it comes time to make the payment, it redirects you to like this janky
Yeah,
page on a different website, which is loaded an iframe from the bank, which then takes the payment and then redirects back to our website to handle the completed transactions. So yeah, some of that bank stuff is really gnarly.
it's so bad. It's really bad. And like the thing is, once they leave your page, you completely lose any ability to help them.
Yeah.
Like you can't do anything to help. You can't suggest anything. There's no intelligence. There's no
Yeah.
like, hey, it looks like you're having a problem. Like, can one of our representatives help fix this for you? Or what?
Mm-hmm.
There's none of that. Like they're
Yeah.
gone. They're off your
Just hope
page.
for
There's
the best.
nothing you can do. Yeah, exactly. Cross your fingers. And if they never come back, you're like, I guess if they abandoned
Yeah.
or it just never worked.
Yeah.
So anyway, that's been interesting. So that's been fun. Wilbur Power is working with me on that, and we basically just do like calls, and I just tell him change this, and he's like, okay, so we can just change it live as I'm done. I feel so bad for him because sometimes it's like I don't know. It's not probably a great way to do it, but he bears with me. He's quite patient with me. Here was the one other thing I wanted to talk to you about. Okay, so this is applicable to everybody really. So what is your heuristic for when you split something out to a class versus just putting it in a private method? So we had, for example, this situation where we needed to save and rename this document. We needed to save it to a local, then we needed to put this PDF like stamp on it, then we needed to resave it to a different location, whatever. But the file name was significant because the file was named in a specific way that allowed us to parse data off of it and then stamp the page with like that information. And then we had to rename that using pieces of that file name in the final rename. So in the original, we just had like a simple private method that was just like parse the file name and get the pieces off and return it. And then they came in with a change that was saying, hey, we need to rename it to include 3 of the pieces of information, but not all of them. Whereas before we were just saving it as what it originally was. So the question is like, do you create a couple more private methods? Or you split it out to a class that's like a data transport object that knows how to like basically build itself out of a file path.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? Like what is the dividing line? And obviously like it depends is the answer.
Yeah.
But like, do you have any things that you kind of look for when you're looking at something to say, like, is it just a visual reference for you? Is it just like, this looks sort of like it's getting messy? Or is it like I'm really having a hard time testing this, and so I'm going to change it out? Or is it, I feel like I'm using this in multiple places and you're trying to dry it up or whatever? Because this was literally only going to get used in this one spot. It was
Yeah.
never going to get really used again. So my argument, my first instinct was like split it to a class. And my other developer's first instinct was like just create another method.
Hmm.
So what's your comfort level in those situations? Like what's your kind of gut reaction to that? I don't know. Again, it's hard to say without like code in front of you.
Yeah. Yeah.
But if you only have code that's being used in one place, do you extract it to a class, or do you just keep it as a public or a private method or something?
I mean, I suppose yeah, it does. It does depend. It
Always, right? It always depends.
it depends on the surrounding context. Is like how much other stuff is in where this private method is,
Yeah.
and are
Like how
you
long is the current class getting, right?
yeah, how big is the current class? How much are you muddying the current class with this specific logic? And you know, what level of testing do you need? Like if you're happy just to hit the public interface and you don't care to test the individual private methods, you're just happy to see the side effects of the public interface, then it could be fine. Uh, I think it was Jeffrey Way that coined the term like ick-driven development or something like that, where when you look at
Interesting.
it, is it gross to look at?
Yeah.
Um, I did this with indent ping me when it comes to handling alerts, and it was just a method initially that I then pulled all of it out into a class, because then you get a much more expressive, much more readable API. So before it was just like this raise alert, and that was in a trait, and then we just called that, and it was a bunch of protected private methods, and it was tricky to test the individual bits of it. So I pulled it out into a class called raise, and then you can be like raise : alert for subject or whatever, and then it gives you the readability, but it also gives you the ability to test in isolation that class and that it's doing
Yeah.
what you need it to do. And I think that's kind of the driver for me. If you've got private methods that you can use reflection, you can do all kinds of horrible things to expose those private methods to be tested. But I typically try and avoid private methods wherever possible, just because it makes it more difficult to test in a lot of scenarios. So, and as I said, it comes back to the context. Do you care about testing the individual parts of that functionality, or do you need to be able to just observe the side effects and say, given this input to this class or this input to this method, did I get back from it what I was expecting at the end of it? So that could just be as simple as seeing that an event was dispatched with the correct parameters, or that
Right.
you had a record in the database. Laravel makes that kind of stuff really easy, whether you're using assert true on an exist query or if you're using the assert database has and things like that. So yeah, it's context dependent, but a lot of it comes down to what it looks like, and how it feels, and how much stuff is really in that class. So I'm not gonna extract something based on architecture or for the sake of purity or anything like that. But if it starts to feel heavy and bloated, then I'll probably consider pulling it out into something separate.
Yeah. I think for me, like it is this like balancing act of like I certainly it's really nice when you can just do end to end and you can just test side effects, which is great. But when you have these sort of shared logic, so a perfect example is like what you've done with like extracting things to language files, where you're saying, I know that I need to expect this sort of output, right? If you have to share that somewhere, like if like in your test you have to like do magic string sort of stuff,
Mm-hmm.
and like um or for example, or if in your test you have to do some sort of parsing that the class is doing in order to be able to get the same result at the
Mm-hmm.
end.
Yeah.
Like if you have to basically duplicate what your class is doing in order to make sure that it can do the thing in
Mm-hmm.
your test, it either means that you need to be able to extract that thing and test it a little bit better, right? Um, or I suppose like when you said you like to avoid private methods as much as possible, did you mean in general you like to avoid private methods, or you like to avoid testing private methods?
I tend to avoid having private methods. I'll use protected, but private. It depends on if I want to test it, right? Sometimes if it's just a little throwaway thing, like you want to extract an if statement into a well-named private method. So instead of doing
Sure,
if
yeah,
this
right,
has
yeah,
some
yeah.
condition, or this dollar blah equals that dollar, whatever, to name that thing, this has some condition that could probably, and I'm not expecting like in my controllers for people to ever extend them.
Yeah, for sure.
So protected or private doesn't really bother me too much, but yeah, private I would seldom use, I think.
Yeah. It's the guy that I'm talking about specifically, kind of what he told me the other day is he's like, I'm kind of tending right now towards longer methods.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, okay. Like, what does that mean? Like, what is the motivation behind that? Because to me, if I see a method that has like more than like 10 or 12 lines, it's sort of like,
Yeah.
what's going on there? Like, is that really like, does that stuff belong like in just a method on another class, or does that
Mm-hmm.
justify like its own class? Like, is that a job that's happening there?
Yeah.
Are you updating like multiple pieces of code there? Like, okay, are you dispatching stuff? Okay, like it just doesn't, and I think his argument is this. Well, I just want to see what's going on. Like, I don't want to have to click through 5 places to figure out what's
Mm-hmm.
happening. Like, I just want to see what's going on there.
Yeah.
I think my counter to that is go look at your tests.
Mm-hmm.
If you want to see what's going on, go look at your tests and see
Yeah.
what assertions are being made. You
Well,
know
and
what I mean?
this is where the readable method names come into it. That if you want to see what's going on, and I actually had this discussion with the new guy that started with us a couple of weeks ago. He said, I can extract all these things to methods, but at the end of the day, it's going to be the same. I'm like, yes, it's going to be the same, but instead of having 50 lines in this method, you're going to have 10 lines, and it's going to be much more readable. So if I care to evaluate what the conditional method is doing, your guard clause method, then I can go and look at that to make sure that your logic is correct and that you're doing the right thing. But in terms of reading a 10-line method versus a 50-line method that's got inline conditionals and it's looping through things and it's returning values and using temporary variables and things like that, I think from a processing load, especially if I'm doing code review, I don't want to read a 50-line method. I'm happy to read 5 10-line methods or 10 5-line methods because it's easy to process and it's easy to digest what's happening in each of those things. And this is where I think Adam goes, start the outside in. And then when you need to drop down to the unit level, when you need to test some specific piece of functionality, say on a model or within a class, then you can start doing that. And going back to the alert stuff that I was working on, I started with an inline method, wrote all the tests to make sure that worked, and then extracted to a class because,
Correct. Yeah.
it worked a lot better that way. And then I could have tests for the specific methods in the class to make sure that the class was doing what needed to be done, which gave me some assurance that the class behaved outside of the context of the end-to-end test, which was saying that given I received an alert, here are all the side effects that are observed. So I think they go hand in hand. I certainly want to try and keep the complexity and the length of my methods down. And I think that's, if you run any of those insight tools or metric tools or those kinds of things, they'll all start to buff once your methods start to get a bit longer by default. And I thought it was interesting. I was watching some of Caleb's videos on rebuilding Alpine, and he specifically said in there, I like to bump my font size up really big so I can focus on what's happening. And if it's more than a screen's worth of scrolling, then the method's too big, kind of thing. So, it's an interesting metric. It's purely an aesthetic thing in a lot of instances, but it also makes you really think about what those methods are doing.
Yeah, I know. I'm in almost complete agreement with everything that you're saying. Like, I do that. Like, red, write the tests. Green, slime it, make it work. Refactor. Now everything still works, but now I have it. It's readable. So I'll have a class, and like sometimes in like, what do you call, like you have like a handle method, and then the handle
Yeah.
method is basically just delegating a bunch of crap. And so you can
Mm.
say, if this should be run, then you know what I mean? Or
Yeah.
basically maybe like if uh, this file is not available, return false, you
Hmm.
know, guard clause.
Yeah.
And then you say, in the bottom, you say, this stamp PDF, whatever, this move PDF to archive, this delete original PDF, right? And then you
Hmm.
just know, okay, that's what's happening. That's what's going on. But then if you like want to break down what's happening, right? Sometimes if you have to click around to those methods, you can lose track a little bit. But and so basically what this guy, this other developer is doing is, it's not like it's bad code. It's really not. He just kind of like prefers, I think he prefers to like write a comment instead of extracting it to a method.
Hmm.
Like he'll just write a well-formed comment that says like, this is what this is doing. Did it 2 lines.
Yeah.
This is what this is doing. Did it 2 lines.
And
Here's
then
what
you
this
end
is
up
doing. One
then you end
line.
up with this scenario where you've got more comments than you've got actual code explaining what you're doing instead of just extracting readable methods.
Yeah. So yeah, that's what I'm comfortable with. Like I'm comfortable with like extract a readable method or extract a class or whatever.
Hmm.
And I think the other piece is too. The other piece for me with the class is like it's easier to test. And geez, dude, it is freaking easier to change.
Yeah,
It is so much
absolutely.
easier to change. Like if you have like 100 methods, it's like open closed principle,
Hmm.
right? Open for extension, closed for modification. So, like this class just always works. Like it doesn't freaking care at all what the file name is. It doesn't
Hmm.
care at all. You pass it this object and you say build annotation and you say build final file name, and it doesn't care. It's that thing always works. You never have to change that thing. Now, if they ask if they want to change what the annotation is going to be, you just go change that other class. You don't have to change the class that's doing the writing of the file.
Hmm.
If you want to change how it's parsing the file name, great, go do that. But you don't have to
Yeah.
change the class that's actually writing the file, right? So I think that's the thing for me. That's where it starts to feel gross. Is like I'm like, okay, this is doing like two things, great, no problem. It's doing like 3 things. Now it's doing 4 things. It's like, okay, well if I have to change any of these 4 things, now I have to change this class every time. Where it's like I can extract this thing and make it way easier to change in the future.
Yeah.
Make the change easy, then make the easy change. Yeah,
Yeah. Hmm.
cool. Okay, so with that being said, we can jump into some of this then ping me stuff.
Yeah.
We have got. I mean, why don't we start at like I want to talk real briefly about the project and like the hierarchy of things.
Hmm.
So what we've got is at the top level we've got projects. So you come in, think of it if you're like using Envoy or something like that. You've got a project which basically belongs to a single repo. That's your repo. That's your project. Um, Underneath that project, you have a number of tasks. This represents all the scheduled things that are in your kernel. .php, your console kernel.php. You have jobs that are scheduled. You have commands that are scheduled. You have closures that are scheduled. You have all different types of things that can be scheduled, and like 3 different ways to schedule each one of them, right? If you're scheduling a what is it? If you're scheduling a job, is it a
Yeah.
job?
We got
You have to new it
jobs.
up.
Yeah.
You have to new the job up. If you're
I
if you're
didn't even
scheduling a
know.
command,
I didn't even know you could do that until we were pairing on it the other day, and then there was a whole edge case that we just didn't handle that at all. So I'm glad we stumbled upon that because
yeah,
now we've got handling for it specifically.
yeah. If you're scheduling a command, you can use either like the name of it or you can use the actual class. If you're scheduling if you're just calling this call, you can actually do a closure, or you could do an invocable class, or you could do right. Like, I mean, there's just a number of different ways you can do this,
Yeah.
right? So we've got projects, then we've got tasks, which represent all those scheduled things, and then once those tasks start executing in your production environment, they will then ping me. They will then ping into then ping me,
Hmm.
and they will start an execution. An execution represents a single run of one of those tasks. That execution will actually have multiple associated pings, your ping start, your ping end, which is like the process started, the process finished, or the process skipped, whatever. And then once those things ping in, basically what we do is we have a couple timers that start running and tell us if a job never returned or if a job never ran, whatever. When any of those things happen, then we raise alerts. And if the status of an execution ever changes, then the status of a task changes. And if the status of a task changes, then the status of the project has to change. So it kind of like is this, it's events bubbling up, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you have an execution that starts, you have a ping that starts, a ping never returns, it never finishes. So it times out. Then the ping, or actually that execution times out. That times out the task fails. Now the project is in a warning state, right? So that all worked fine and dandy. And then when I went to look at your PR tonight, I was noticing this new alert thing. And I'm like, what is this alert thing?
Mm-hmm.
And you explained, and I was very confused. I still have some questions, but my question was like, is this the alerts that are given to our users? And you said yes and no. And my question was, why can't we just use the notification DB driver, right? Why can't we just say, hey, user, here's a notification, and we're going to store it in the database so that we have a record of that notification that was sent. But an alert is not that, however. So talk to me about like, what are these alerts? What does an alert model represent?
So the alert, I don't even think about using the notification driver, to be honest, but it's not necessarily.
It's not the same. It doesn't. Yeah. It actually wouldn't work for what we're talking about. Now that I realize that, but
yeah, it's not necessarily a notification to the end user. It's more a historical point of reference for when a task failed, or when an execution failed, or when a project went into a warning state. So it's about giving us some resolution into when things have failed and when things have become healthy again, so that not necessarily that we would trigger a notification to the user or to send a Slack Slack ping or whatever. It's more around tracking the historical state. So we can do some things around, in the last month, this task ended up failing this many times, or you've got a clean bill of health. It's around, it's kind of the equivalent of an uptime check, that you could say your website was up for 98% of the month or 99.5% of the month or whatever. Because the key thing is if you have things failing in the middle of the night, you might see that it had failed, and you get the email in the morning to see that it had failed, but you wouldn't really have much, to go by. If you look at that in a week or a month, you wouldn't know if a specific release triggered something to fail. All those kinds of historical metrics, and we don't have to keep these forever.
It could also be too that it fails in the middle of the night and it doesn't fail in the morning. Like you can never reproduce the error during the middle of the day, right? So if you never have that historical record, you just get an email that it failed, but you come in the morning and it looks green, everything's good. What happened, right?
Yeah. So you would get the Slack notification, or you would get the email notification, but email is flaky. Maybe the email ends up in spam or whatever, and you don't see it. So having the alert history there, you can go back and see, okay, well, we did a deploy and it was failing here, and then we did a new deploy and the new release and it was all fine. So, you can see that there was something in a release that had caused errors. And I don't want to go too deep into providing insight over what that was. That's what your error tracking software is for.
Correct,
but in terms of like, you did a release here and you can see that the release changed and you started getting alerts, and then you fixed that. And so, it's all about the historical data, because all of our tables are otherwise transient. They will show you the current status of a task or a project. And if you were to log into the web interface at any given time, you would see that, okay, my project is healthy now, or that my task is passing now, or whatever. Yeah. Clicking into that, you could have like a little calendar view or something that shows you like 3 days ago,
alerts that have been raised.
You had alerts for a period of time. And you could drill down into that, and you could see on a given day, like it fails on the hour, but it's okay after that, and things like that. So,
and to be clear, so an alert is
these are all things that we can like add later, but I figure we need to capture the information now and then figure out what to do with it later, because we can't get it back historically, but we can't get it back retrospectively.
So when I was looking at the alert table, I did have some questions. So we had like a created at, and then we had a ended at.
Mm-hmm.
And what I understood this to be when you explained it to me is you said that this alert is going to happen every time the status of any of these items update.
Yeah.
Is that true?
So when
Or is it only when it goes into an alert state, right? So if it
when it
goes
goes
into
into an
like a
alert state,
warning
yeah, yeah.
state.
So
Okay,
if it goes into
that's helpful
warning,
to understand. Yeah.
so
Yeah.
then we can say that it was in a warning state for 15 minutes, right? Or
Sure.
we
Yeah.
could, because then we could infer, um, it began to error, or we saw it in a timeout state, and then eventually the task finished. So we could say that the alert did in fact complete.
Yeah. Yeah. That makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. So we could show like amount of time down, amount of instances that it went down, right? A number of times that it went down. So it's historical. My second question was, does this alerts table is it also being used to determine the current statistics or the current state of these alertables? Because really, at the end of the day, this alert table will only show us anything that is in a bad state, right? If you
Mm-hmm.
just said anything that has a started but not an ended at
Mm-hmm.
for this whatever, this project or this, then I mean really that's like, here's everything. Here's everything that's in a bad state right now. You want to know what
Mm-hmm.
it is? Here it is. This executable failed, this task failed, this project is in a bad state, whatever it is. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
that's where it's going to be, right? It's going to be it's going to be like, it's historical, yes, but if there's anything currently happening right now, it's going to be on the execution or the task or the project itself, but it will also exist in the alerts, right?
Yeah.
So my question was, are we using alerts? Are we using that model to inform us about the overall state of a project, or execution or whatever,
Well,
or project or task?
from the project and the task status, you can see that it is failing, but we don't say that it started failing here and it ended failing there, because in a single record, it's hard to track that, because then that would be valid for the current failure, but not for the next one, because then the next one that resets that start and end time. So that's why we keep, because you can then look for a project, you can see if there are any current alerts, and we can see the duration of the current alert. So we can show in the UI that your project is failing and it has been failing for the last 70 seconds or the last 2 hours or whatever.
Yeah. And when you say that, what you mean is one of your tasks is failing. Not all of them. Like one of your tasks is
Could have
failing.
been a bad deploy and suddenly nothing's running.
Sure.
Like
Sure. Yep, that makes sense.
I mean, and if it was a bad deploy, say you left a semicolon in a config file somewhere and you're scrambling to figure out what is causing my website to have a white page.
Right.
We're just gonna see all of these tasks that suddenly failed. And we go, the one thing that I was thinking about there is we need to figure out how we actually trigger the alert notifications. Because if you get into a situation where your entire schedule of tasks stops working, we're surely not going to send an alert for each of the tasks that are failing. Or
You would roll it up.
Yeah.
You would roll it up.
So we need to figure
And
out
that's
how
the
to
nice
do
thing,
that.
like with this alert thing, you could roll it up. You could just group it by project ID, and you could say, here are the things that are failing by that for projects, for particular a project or particular projects or whatever.
But you would have to defer that somehow. Because if you have multiple tasks that all run at the start of an hour, you've got 5 tasks that all run at 0 minutes past the hour, and one of them fails, and then the next one succeeds, and because we don't know when the schedule starts, we just know when the individual tasks start.
Yeah, it's like there will be some interesting configuration around how people want to be alerted. Like, so, in error tracking services, right? So here's the deal with this. Like, it's unlikely, I would say it's probably unlikely that a scheduled task is going to fail once and then work, and then fail once and then work, or fail, then work. I mean, maybe that happens, but I think probably for the most part, if it's failing, it's going to continue to, I don't know. That's not necessarily true, right? There could be environmental things that are changing beneath. But I don't know. I'm not exactly sure what the alert story looks like in that. Like, for me, like, I want to know immediately when something stops working. Like, I don't want to know 10 minutes from now in a roll up. I want to know now, right now, when it happened.
Yeah.
So maybe you do. Maybe you do literally return an error or an email for each one of those, or a Slack message or a Telegram message or whatever it might be.
Mm-hmm.
You would return a error message for all of those. I mean, like, because here's the deal: if you get one message, you might like, oh, okay, I saw it. If you get 15, then you're like, holy crap, what's happening?
Yeah.
Like the
Yeah.
entire thing's blown up. What's going on here? So
Yeah, and I
anyway,
think, aside from that situation where you have a failed deploy or your task scheduler stops running or whatever, I think it's highly unlikely. I think it's highly unlikely that you would have every single one of your tasks fail. And then, I mean, we could provide a daily or a weekly summary or something that says, on this day, this project had this many failing tasks. Like, we can figure that
yeah,
stuff
and
out later.
likely, if every single task is failing, oh dear is also going to be screaming at you, saying, "Hey, your site's down."
Mm-hmm.
Like,
Yeah.
you know what I mean? It's either probably like working or not working. So
Yeah. ID will be
interesting.
screaming at you. What's the other one? Flare will be yelling at you. All of
Yeah,
those tools will be yelling at you at once. So
yeah, you'll know
yeah,
pretty quickly.
I think I think getting that is okay. I think you could probably look at customization later that says
Yeah,
notify me
for sure.
anytime a task is failing, and then just
Hmm.
put in there that, like, if a task is failing, you will get one email for every failing task. Or you could
Yeah,
say notify when the project is failing, and that way, if the project is failing, the project is failing.
yeah,
And
yep.
then
That
you would
makes
get an
sense.
email saying this project has one or more failing tasks. And we could actually show at that point. Now, at the point that we trigger that notification, and we could probably put some debounce in there that's like, don't send more than one notification every 10 minutes on the project level. Because that way you could send one, and then by the time that notification triggers on the project, you could say, okay, you've got 6 tasks with alerts right now. And we can
Yeah,
figure that out
right.
easily
Yeah, they
enough.
could check in. Yep, for sure.
Or if you say I want it for every task, then you would get 6 emails for each task. And I think that's probably simple enough to implement, right? Do you want to be alerted when the project is unhealthy or when individual tasks are healthy? And you can tweak that as much as you want depending on
The good
your own
thing is
preference.
like honestly, if you just said alert me when the tasks are unhealthy, that's going to alert you when the project is unhealthy, right? Like because
Correct.
all of them bubble up. Um, but you could, I suppose, say if you wanted to be alerted every time, like, hey, I want to be alerted every 10 minutes while the task is failing, or if you just said if my project is in an error state for this long, like, hey, it's still not working, you might want to check this or something. I'm not exactly sure, but
Yeah.
yeah, those are interesting questions to have. We will. I'm really thankful for the Laravel notification system. It makes all of this way easier,
Yeah.
right? This whole thing is a lot easier, and I think the database notification is actually a really interesting one too. So like, hey, which ones have they read? Which ones haven't they read? Which ones have they seen? Which one haven't they seen?
Yeah.
If you're just doing it in like a drop down, I suppose. But anyway, there was another thing I wanted to talk about, which also speaks to like the idea of scaling. Now, we are wanting to scale, yes, but we are wanting to launch worse. So the concern for me is that a site like ours is going to get quite a bit of traffic, right? Not like heavy traffic, but HTTP traffic,
Yeah.
right? Where we're just going to be getting a lot of pings. My concern, I think, is that if we don't have something that's scalable in front of that, like that could queue these requests essentially, then you might end up in a difficult situation. Somebody like Use Fathom, who really Use Fathom? We know those guys.
We do
We
know
know
those
those guys.
guys.
Yeah,
Wonderful,
they've
wonderful
they've
show sponsors.
they are
Fathom.
they are. Maybe we should talk about them a little bit.
I think so.
I'm gonna hold on. I'm gonna hold that thought for a moment. How do we scale those front end requests? But before we do, let's talk about Fathom. So Fathom Analytics is simple analytics for your website. It's for marketers, for business owners, for bloggers. It basically gives you the simplest view with the most important information that you need to know about the visitors that are currently on your page. It's a real time, as well as any historical information that you might want to know. There are a couple of things that make Fathom really amazing. The first thing is that they're completely privacy focused. So they do not want to track your users around the web. They don't want to have to store cookies on their computer. They want them to have anonymity, but they want you to know the pieces of information that you need to know in order to make effective changes on your website to better serve your customers. So no more of those cookie pop-ups that say, we use cookies on this site to track blah, blah, blah. They don't. So you don't have to have those anymore. The other challenge that you have whenever you're using a tool that's by a third party is that eventually Ghostery or Ad Blocker or something like that is going to figure out that use Fathom, is being listed on a bunch of sites. Let's go ahead and block that, just like they do with Google Analytics, right? So this is a problem because you lose that ability to get that traffic, to figure out who that is. So on April 15th, the Fathom team published a article which talks about their ability to bypass ad blockers with custom domains. So the way that they do this is they give you a custom domain to serve your Fathom code from, and now everything just comes from your domain. So no problem. You don't have to get blocked. It won't get blocked, right? Because it's coming from you essentially. So this is going to be great. It's not going to get blocked. You're still going to be able to get all the information from your customers that you need without having to be invasive or cookies and all that stuff. This is really, really awesome. I think this is the first group that I have heard that's doing this. I've not heard of this before, really. So pretty cool, pretty innovative. I think this is a really great idea, and I'm excited to see how this goes for them. I hope it goes really well.
Yeah.
So here's the deal. If you haven't checked Fathom out before, go to usefathom.com/north. You get a free trial, and you also get $20, I think. $20? $20. I think it was $20 towards your next month's bill. So you should check them out for sure. Super easy to get started. Beautiful dashboard for you to take a look at. And we would really appreciate it if you'd go check that out. And even if you don't get started, just go to the link. Usefathom.com/north. Thanks. Okay, so the question is, how do we handle scale, right? How do we handle the scale of requests that we will likely receive? This happened because we were looking at, on our executions, we used to have a started at timestamp, an ended at timestamp, and a created at timestamp. But as I looked through the PR, I noticed Mr. Dorinda had taken off the started at timestamp. He said, well, the created at timestamp is the started at timestamp. Mm-hmm. We were just going to take the started at value that the ping comes in with, because when you ping into us, it tells us, hey, we started this on this time. So it basically negates the delay that you have with the HTTP round trip, right? The request latency, if you will. So Mr. Dorinda had just said, well, we'll just take that time that they started it at, and we'll set that as our created at date. But what we said was, well, what if there's a delay? Like, what if there's a massive delay between the time that we get it and the time that we're actually able to store it in the database? What we're going to have your time that you started it as in our created at date. And you said, well, do we care? And we don't really, unless we need to debug what's happening, right? Mm-hmm. If we notice that the started at time is 5 minutes or 5 minutes before our created at time, we have these massive delays in place that are going to be causing all sorts of problems for how our timing functions work, right?
Yeah.
So I think we're going to put that back in place.
Yeah. Yeah, I've already flicked that back. I hadn't thought about that, but I was talking with Freek the other day, and he sort of floated the idea to me, which got the gears turning, that we're going to have a huge traffic spike at midnight. We're going to have a big spike every hour and possibly less,
every 5 minutes and every 10 minutes and every
a
half hour.
Yeah, so we're going to have those spikes. Now, the plan is that we're going to put this all on Vapor, and the theory is that will handle the scale for us to infinity. We'll probably need to do at some point some optimization around processing things. At the moment, we're just tossing everything on a queue, and then Vapor will scale to a point. But when I was speaking with Freek, what did occur to me is, because we're on Vapor, we could conceivably, for larger customers, for people that want their own instance, we could conceivably just spin up a new environment.
Hmm.
And the client library is built. I had to do this so that I could test against different endpoints. The client library is built such that you could just give it a custom URL and it would go there, right? It would send all of your
Nice.
pings to
Yeah.
that URL as opposed to the main then
A
ping me
custom
one.
subdomain.
Yep.
Sure.
So we could do custom subdomains and just deploy everything there. The question then becomes, does it all, like your pings go to a custom subdomain and then you get your own processes and workers and things like that, but then that just writes back to the main database? And
Right.
that way you just
Yeah.
log in to then ping me for everything rather than your own instance. So there's some consideration there, but it's definitely possible. The way this is built, it can certainly, like, you could just self-host it if we were to make the code available for the application itself. But
Yeah.
there are certainly ways of doing it. That, you know, doing one instance per client, like if you needed your own distinct instance, could work, but it means you've got to log into your own distinct instance. We have to do maintenance of the, you know, if we push an update to one, we've got to push an update to all of them, and that gets, I mean, it's not hard because, you know, Vapor, we can just loop through all of the environments and say deploy there, deploy there, deploy there, deploy there. So conceivably that's possible. But I think, you know, using multiple multiple environments and then all writing to the same database, that may have its own scale issues.
Yeah.
But, you know, RDS should handle that, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I know Chris Vidal was talking the other day too, and he was talking about, I think he wrote some little Go stuff. And basically, I think what he did was they have an endpoint that is running a Lambda that then pushes things into an Elasticache, sort of like queue,
Mm-hmm.
and then their application essentially acts as like a, you know, just a big queue worker, so that they have infinite scale on that, like on the requests that they can handle, right? All those webhooks just come in, go straight to a Lambda, and then just go straight up to a queue, and they just consume them as quickly as they can.
Yeah.
So pretty cool. Hey, dude, listen, I would love to continue this on for about forever. That would be
Yeah.
great, but I am completely out of steam. It is 12:11, and I am going to crash. And like, I'm in all my clothes that I wore today. I'm probably just going to go lay on that bed right there, tell Google to turn off the lights, and pass out.
Nice.
And so, it's been good chatting, and I am going to give all of the rest of the Then Ping Me code the love that it deserves tomorrow by giving a sufficient and thorough pull request review.
Mm-hmm.
And you will learn what it feels like to be one of the people under
On
the
the other
scrutiny of my eye.
Well, you've done well
I'm
so
just
far,
kidding.
but you could also just wake up and see everything's already been merged and I've moved on without you.
Yeah, that's possible. That is possible. Dude, it is like I've been trying to figure out like how in the world do I make time for all of the things, and it's just not I don't know. I've not figured it out yet. So, tomorrow's the day. Tomorrow is the day. I have cleaned off my list for today so that don't have a lot to do tomorrow.
Nice.
We're going to make it happen.
Excellent. I'm going to work more on the client library so that we
Cool.
can support those few releases prior to when everything was added into Laravel.
Yeah.
So when the events were added in like 6.0.4, the start and finished, and then the skipped event was added in 6.4.1. So I need to create a couple of releases in there. So I've shuffled some things around. I haven't tagged anything yet. It's just branches at the moment that I've renamed. So in theory, we'll be able to have full support for the entirety of Laravel 6 and 7.
Yeah, I was almost thinking like if we really needed to push back to like if somebody was like, hey, I really need 5.8 or whatever, like we can almost write like a hey, extend your console kernel from this special thing, and when you call, you know what I mean?
No,
that's
what I've done, right? So there is the ability in the service container to just extend things. So I've just told the container for Laravel 6.0 through 6.0. before, just use our schedule run, and
Yeah.
that just wraps around what is the current version, and then we just inject our own events in there and we fire those events.
Yeah. And then there you go. Away you go. No problem.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. I think that's a good way to do it. That's an
Yeah,
excellent way to do it.
we'll see how
All right,
that
my
goes.
friend. Well, yeah. Yeah, for sure. For sure. Okay, this is episode 74. 74. Thanks so much for joining us. You can find show notes for this episode at northmeetsouth.audio/74. Hit us up on Twitter at Jacob and at Michael Dorinda, and we would really appreciate it if you'd share this podcast with your friends or rate it up in your podcatcher of choice. 5 stars is definitely appreciated. Thanks for any of you who hung out with us on the live stream. Looks like we've got 2 whole viewers right now. And thanks for those of you who hung around. Rod, you were like our first fan there. So thanks, Rod, for hanging out with us at 1:30 a.m. Much appreciated. All right, everybody. Until next time, stay safe, stay healthy, and stay home.
See you. Bye.